So we have an input of 3, minus 4, 2, minus 3, minus 1, 3, 7 and minus 5. So this is minus 1. But as soon as I say minus 1 plus 2, it becomes 1, which is not minimum in this case. So this 3 will get stored into this current minimum. It will print smallest sum is minus. Hey guys, welcome to our channel Coders Arcade. This is Ashank David, and in today's video we are going to talk about a problem statement which is generally asked in interviews, and this is going to be a question on arrays, and the question name is, the problem statement name is smallest sum continuous subarray. So what exactly is this question? Generally this kind of questions are generally asked in technical coding round when you go for a placement interview, like a technical coding round for any company that you sit for when you go for the placements. Now, the problem statement is smallest sum continuous subarray. Now, what is this problem? Let's see. Given an array containing n integers, the problem is to find the sum of the elements of the continuous subarray having the smallest sum. So, as you can see here, we need to find the sum of the smallest, the sum which is going to be smallest of a subarray inside a given array of n integers. So the size is n. Now here you can see that we have given a test case. So we have an input of 3, minus 4, 2, minus 3, minus 1, 3, 7 and minus 5. Now in this case, this is our array and our output is coming as minus 6. Meaning what? You see, here it says that you have to find the minimum sum of a continuous subarray. So continuous subarray means, see, subarray, if we talk about what exactly is subarray is any element inside a given array or the set of elements inside a given array. In this case, we are talking about continuous subarray. Continuous subarray means, let's take an example here. 3 and minus 4 is a continuous subarray. 3 minus 4, 2 is also a continuous subarray. But if I say 3 and 2, they are not continuous subarray. They can be subarray, but they are not continuous subarray. Continuous subarray means the element should be next to each other in this case. So the subarray which is going to get formed by, in a continuous way, that is continuous subarray. And we have to find the sum of the elements of a continuous subarray whose sum is minimum. Minimum means when I add any of these two numbers, the sum should be minimum out of the whole array. Let's take an example and see this. You see, if we talk about this element 3, so if I add this element 3 with the next, and to form a subarray, basically an element inside an array in itself is a subarray. So in this case, we can say that this 3 is also a subarray in itself of this array that we have been given. So if I say 3 plus minus 4, it becomes minus 1. Minus 1 is minimum. It's not exactly minimum, but there are multiple elements like minus 4, minus 3, minus 1, minus 5. These elements are present, and here these elements are much more minimum than minus 1 when we add these two numbers. So this is minus 1. But as soon as I say minus 1 plus 2, it becomes 1, which is not minimum in this case. So this might not be minimum because already there is minus 5, which is minimum in this case and of this in the scenario of this array. So rather than taking that continuous subarray, let's move our window towards this. Let's start from minus 4. So if I start from minus 4, here this minus 4, if I add this minus 4 with 2, what happens is that it becomes minus 2. Minus 2 plus, if I add minus 3, it becomes minus 5, which is almost equals to the minimum number inside this subarray. Now, if I add minus, so these three numbers will give you minus 5. And now if I add this minus 1 also here, what happens is that minus 5 plus minus 1, which is minus 6. Now minus 6 in this case is minimum out of any element inside this array, which can also be the minimum sum of this subarray. Also, it is a continuous minimum sum because here we are seeing the elements from minus 4 to minus 3, minus 1. which is a continuous subarray whose minimum sum becomes -4, -6, which is minimum in all the elements out of this array. Hence our output came as -6 in this case. And you can see that the subarray is -4, 2, -3, -1, and which is equals to -6 here. So I hope so that you have understood this test case. If we go to test case number 2, you see that now in this particular given array, there are no negative integers. Negative values are not present. That means we don't have to add, you see, simple logic. If I am going to add any positive number, it is going to just increase the value, which is not going to be a smallest sum. In this case, I will return the minimum number which is already present into that particular array. And here in this case, the minimum number is 1. So rather than adding any number and increasing the sum, we want to find the minimum sum, right? So minimum sum will be the minimum element itself in the particular array, that is going to be the minimum sum of a subarray. This 1 is going to be the subarray in itself. Also, it is going to carry the minimum sum as well. So this is going to be the output as 1 for this particular test case. Now, these are the two test cases. I hope so that you have understood this problem statement very well. We have to find the minimum continuous subarray, minimum sum of a continuous subarray. And this is what the problem statement says. I will give the link of this problem statement in the description below. Also, I will explain you everything with the help of a code into your description as well. So you can go ahead and watch the description from there. Okay. So now let's move on to the program that we are going to write. So this is going to be the program. So here in this case, if we see we have started, we are doing this in C++. You can also do it in C as well. You just need to change a little bit of the things here, and it will become it in C. But we are focusing on C++. So let's solve it in C++. Okay. So starting with hash into IO stream, later on I'm going to tell you why I'm using C limits here, using namespace std as usual. And let's talk about this function later on. First, let's go down to the main function here. We have created our main function and we have defined the array as that same first test case array, that is 3, -4, 2, 3, -1, 7 and -5. Okay. Now to calculate the sum of the minimum sum, we will be creating a function up there. Then that function is going to be this function, int smallest sum subarray. Okay, we are going to see that function later on, but first let's see how we are going to do it in the main function. In the main function, we have declared our array. After declaring the array, what we're going to do here is we are calculating the size. So the size is calculated as in C or C++. If you want to calculate the size of a given array, you can use a formula, and that formula is the size of ARR, the whole array, the size of the whole array divided by the size of the first element or any element into the array, which will give you the exact number of elements. Let me tell you guys that this size of is not going to give you the length of the array. Rather than it is going to give you the memory allocated for the array in itself. So in this case, you guys can see if I write here size of ARR, the whole memory allocated, how much bytes of space is allocated for this whole array will be given. Like it will return us this is a function which returns you the memory allocated for that particular array. In this case, so the whole size of the array divided by the size of the first element in that particular array. Okay, and then this is going to calculate, this is going to give us the number of elements into this array, and then I'm going to store that into n, and then after that we are going to call that function. So because this function we have created here, who's going to give us a return a value which is going to be the minimum sum, right? So the return type of this function, I've taken it as int. Int, this is the name of the function which you have created, smallest sum sub array, and in this function we are passing the array and the size of the array itself, so that this function can calculate the smallest sum of a sub array. Okay, now here, because this is here we have called the function, that function which we have created, smallest sum sub array. Now because it is returning the value, we are printing the value here and we are printing it like this. So smallest sum, and then we call that, and the return value will be printed with the output smallest sum equals to this. And this is how we have done it. Now let's go ahead and see this function which we have created, which I'm going to explain you now, we are going to see how we are going to calculate. Okay guys, so here inside this, as you can see, I have already passed the array and the size of the array here. And once I go there, to solve this problem, we will create two variables here, and that is going to be, because we are going to find the minimum sum, right? So what we are going to do is, the idea is to solve this problem, we will apply this idea. The idea here is that let's start iterating the array. We start the iteration of the array elements from the first element itself. So let's say I'm going to start the iteration from here. 3 minus 4, 2, like this I'm going to go in this way. And while I'm going in this way, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add this number with this number and check if the sum is coming in negative or minimum out of all the elements into the array. And if it is there, so I will update it into the minimum. So there are two variables that I've created, current minimum and the minimum. The current minimum will store the most minimum element or most minimum sum found so far into this array while we are iterating. And the minimum will store the final minimum value which is going to be returned from the function. Okay, so in this case, current minimum and minimum. Now, in this case, I have not stored the value 0 initially. Why? Because you see, you'll understand the logic as soon as we go ahead. What is this int max? Why I've taken this int max in this case? In the initial stage, we said that in the current minimum and the minimum, we stored the highest possible value of the capacity of this integer type of variable into this particular variable. So we just stored the highest capacity of the number into this variable, and after that what we did is, so see, for example, if I just click onto here and if I hover my mouse over here, you see that when I hover my mouse over here, it says that it is okay. It's not showing me that properly. Okay, but I'll show you that later on. Okay, so in this case, int max it's a macro basically. Int max is a macro which is going to replace the highest most capacity of this particular variable into it. So the highest most possible integer value which can be held by an integer data type into it, which will be stored here. Okay, same thing I'm gonna do it here. Now why we are doing it here, you'll get to know as soon as we progress into the program. Okay, so we start traversing the elements in the array. So once we started traversing this array, here you can see that I've started the array by, so we have created a for loop. The for loop starts from I equals to 0 because 0 is the index of the first element in the array. So I equals to 0, I is less than n and I plus plus. Okay, so now I'm checking if current minimum is greater than 0 or not. This is my first condition, guys. Now, if the current minimum, which is storing the maximum element, of course, is greater than 0, in that case, store the first element of the array. That means in this case, this 3 will be stored into the current minimum here. This is my first condition. I have to make sure that this first condition becomes true. If it is not true, our first element will not be stored into the current element. Basically, the idea here is, I am assuming that this first element itself, while I am iterating this array, I am assuming that this first element itself, in itself, it is a minimum most sum of subarray. Okay. But in this case, because we have just started from this point, right? So I'm just assuming that this is the minimum most element out of the whole array in this case. Okay. So to do that, my first condition should be true. So if the current minimum is greater than 0, then the current minimum will become the error of I. I is 0 in the first iteration, right? So this 3 will get stored into this current minimum. This condition will only work if you will store this int max into it. That means, because see, we cannot predict what type of number the first element contains. It can contain any number. It can contain basically any value. I don't know that value. User may enter it, or we don't know about that value, right? So in that case, we have to make sure that everything is fine and running smoothly, we make sure that the highest most value is stored into this particular variable current min. Okay, and which will result in securing our first element of the array into this particular variable current minimum. And once this is done, the current minimum will be updated with the first element of the array, right? Once we do that, now because this is the else part, we are not doing anything here. This is for the first iteration. When the for loop is at first element, it will store that first element into current minimum. Okay. Now, in the same function, out of that for loop, we will update the minimum. Okay. We will, inside the for loop only, we will update the minimum. See, minimum equals to, here we will check which one is minimum, the minimum or the current minimum. If you see here, minimum is also set to the highest capacity of number here, int max. So in this case, minimum equals to, we will find which one is minimum. Minimum here is the min, is the function here, the inbuilt function which is going to be used for finding the minimum out of both the numbers. So in this case, minimum is the highest most value right now, and the current minimum is 3. So which one is minimum? Of course, current minimum is minimum, which is 3. This is the highest most value. This is 3. So of course 3 is minimum, so 3 will be stored here in the minimum. I hope so this is very much clear for the first iteration. Now the for loop goes to the second iteration, I value becomes 1. That means now it starts pointing towards this -4. Okay, so -4. Now check if current minimum is greater than 0, current minimum is 3. 3 is greater than 0? Yes, it is greater than 0. So in this case, we will not add it. We will just move it to the next element. So now -4 became the current minimum. So next, this -4 on itself became the current minimum. We left this 3 because there's no point of adding any number in front. If the number is only greater than 0, then no need of adding. That number can be, it's possible that that number only can be minimum. Understood my point? And that is the reason why. So in this case, -4 became the current minimum. Okay, and then we skip the else part because it is if else, right? Now after this, which one is minimum? Minimum is 3. This time from the previous iteration, minimum is 3 and the current minimum is -4. So 3 and -4, which one is minimum? Of course -4 is minimum. So -4 will be updated to this minimum. Now minimum changed to from 3 to, it changed to -4. Understood this, guys? I hope so this is very much clear. Now minimum is also -4 and current minimum is also -4 in this case. The for loop starts again. This time current minimum is -4. Is greater than 0? No, it is not greater than 0. When it is not greater than 0, we will add that number with the next element. Because the for loop is now pointing towards the next element, which is this one, right? So else current minimum plus equals to ARR of I. That means -4 plus the current element in the array, that is 2. So -4 plus 2 will happen here. Understood? And once that happens, -2 comes. When -2 comes, current minimum becomes -2. So which one is greater now? Current minimum is -2. This is -4. Which one is minimum? -4 itself is only minimum. So -4 will remain minimum and -2 won't become minimum in this case. Okay. Now moving on, when we are going to go to the next iteration, the next coming value will be -3. Okay. So remember this, guys, that our minimum is still -4. Okay. Current minimum is -2. So now we are going to see if -2 is greater than 0. No, it is not. So in this case, -2 plus -3. Because this is the current element which we are working on according to the for loop, right? So -2 plus -3. So current minimum became -5. -5. Okay. And if you remember from the previous iteration, minimum was -4. So minimum is -4. This is -5. Which one is minimum? Of course, -5 is minimum. So minimum will be updated with -5 in this case. Like that. Okay. Then the for loop again starts. This time it will point towards this 1. Okay. And current minimum is what? Current minimum is -5. So -5 is greater than 0? No, it is not. So what happens is -5 plus minus 1, which becomes minus 6. Now it goes here. Minimum was minus 5. Current minimum is minus 6. Which one is minimum? Of course, minus 6 is minimum. So minus 6 is became the minimum. Understood this, guys? I hope so. This is very much clear. Okay. Now, the for loop goes to the next one, which is 7 here. Okay. Now you see. Minus 6 is the current minimum. Is it greater than 0? No, it is not greater than 0. So what happens here is it gets added. Minus 6 plus 7. Current minimum becomes 1. So the current minimum becomes 1. So when the current minimum becomes 1, what happens is, now you see. Okay. So in this case, when the current minimum becomes 1, you see it goes here. Minimum equals to min of minimum and current minimum. Minimum is minus 6, current minimum is 1. Which one is smaller? Minus 6 is smaller, so minus 6 will remain minimum in this case. Okay, guys? Then it will still iterate and it will go to the last element, which is minus 5. So even now if I add minus 5 also, it will become minus 1 only. So there's nothing here into this that will affect our program, and this is the reason why it will finish all the iteration, because once minus 6 is the smallest one, once it found it, it will return minimum, which is minus 6 in this case. And once it returns minus 6, it will print smallest sum is minus 6 in this case basically, and return 0. This is how this program is going to work. I hope so that this is very much clear to all of you. And this is how the problem works. Now, if I run this program, you see what happens. Let's run this code. Okay. When I run this code, it will print. Just a minute. It will print smallest sum is minus 6, as you can see, guys. Now, if you want, we can debug this code, but this video is going to become too long for that. So let's debug this code in any other video. In the next part, I'm going to explain you by debugging this program, and that way you'll understand this using debugging as well. Well, I hope so that you have understood this problem very well, guys. And if you have any doubts, you can ask me in the comment section below. I'll try to solve those doubts as soon as possible. And thanks for watching, guys. This is Ashang David signing off. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to our channel Coders Arcade, as well as don't forget to press the bell icon so that you won't miss any future updates. So well, that's all for this video, guys. Thank you. I'll see you guys in the next one.